This podcast and video is being made to help my Year 10 and 11 students understand how to answer the 6-mark question, explain why the Nazi Party became increasingly popular between 1929 and 1932. Now, this is for a dirt lesson, but I also think this would be a really useful thing for Year 11s to be doing if you're practicing and revising and getting ready for your exams in the summer. So we're looking at why the Nazis became popular. If you get a question that's got 2 dates in it, like this one does, so you can see it's got 1929 here and 1932 here, then you know that the events that they want you to be talking about are in those years. So you have to have a look at what happens in 1929 and what's going on in 1932 that means that the Nazis are doing very well. Now, what I've got here is a timeline. It's just a generic timeline that I've made to show Hitler's rise to power for another video that I've made. Not all of the stuff that you can see here is going to be relevant. So if we take a look at the... if we have a look at all the different events in 1933, well, obviously we know we can cross them out because we're not looking at 1933. It's not part of our question. What we are looking at is Hitler's rise to power and the things that happen between those years that happen that are important. Now, obviously, my timeline starts in 1928. We don't really need to talk about that, but we could mention at the beginning of our answer that the Nazis were very unpopular in 1928 and start to become more popular after 1929. Obviously, we have the Wall Street crash. If you don't know what that is, you need to pause this video, go back and have a look at what the Wall Street crash is, because I don't have enough time to go through it in this particular video. As you can see, in 1930, the Nazis are increasing and their power from 1940 from 14 seats in the Reichstag to 107. And then it starts to get a little bit more interesting. So in 1931, you can see that there is a rising popularity of communism in the country. You can see Hitler's running for president and he's losing. But also I've put on here, and I discuss as we go along, that by 1932, Hitler is winning 37% of the vote, and I think that's down to the example of the propaganda that I've put on here for you. So this is Hitler's campaign post, one of Hitler's campaign posters from 1932, and we're going to have a look at his use of propaganda to help us answer our question. So there are 2 sides to this argument, really. The first one is what the Nazis did themselves to help them gain power. The second is what external or other factors are there that meant that the Nazis gained power. Now, a lot of people in their first answer for their AP3 assessment in Year 10 put that Hitler was a really good public speaker, which is absolutely fantastic, but it's an example, not a reason. So what I'm looking for in this answer is Hitler's leadership skills. Hitler was a strong leader who convinced the German people that he was the person who was strong enough to fix Germany's problems. An example of that is his powerful public speaking. So you can use that example, but in a redraft or in a practice for revision, make sure that you're explaining his leadership skills, not his public speaking. That's an example of leadership skills. The second are the promises that the Nazis gave to the German people. Now, I've been banging on this year about using the terms work and bread, because they were Hitler's 2 promises to the German people. They were the main focuses. He promises to sort out the economic problems. He promises to be a strong leader for Germany, ignoring the Treaty of Versailles, which we know is hated. He promises to remilitarise Germany, and he wants to make the country a proud nation again. And these are the kind of promises the German people are wanting to hear, and they're what the Nazis are saying all the time. The last one is the organisation. Now, the SA, which are the first army that they used by the Nazis, they're very, very prominent in the 1920s, early 1930s, but don't forget, Night of the Long Knives kind of sorts that one out. They looked incredibly smart, and they were taking part in rallies in the late 20s that looked incredibly impressive, and it had an impact on how the Germans viewed the Nazi Party. They were seen as official and military and, well, just a bit fancy. So don't put that, obviously, but put something along those lines in your answer. And the other thing is that the the Nazis had a really strong grassroots organisation of people in local areas, villages, towns and cities doing things in the community that were seen as really positive. So the example that I've put here is they put together soup kitchens for the unemployed. Obviously, unemployment is a huge issue for Germany after the Wall Street crash. Other factors that had an impact on Nazi rise in popularity is the fear of communism. By the early 1930s, Germany has the second biggest communist party in the world, the first obviously being the Soviet Union and Russia. And so communism is spreading rapidly and is really, really popular in Germany. Now, for working class people, it might have been seen as a good thing, but for business owners and for farmers in Germany, they were really concerned about what communism would do to them and their businesses and their livelihoods. If you want a little bit more information about capitalism and communism, you need to go and find the video on that, because I don't have time to go into it now. But if communism had become part of the government in Germany, then farms are going to be collectivised, so they're not going to be privately owned, they're going to be all brought together and owned by the government. And it's the same for big business as well, because communism thinks that you should have businesses that are owned by the government, not private people. And so that was a big issue for the middle classes of Germany in particular, and the upper classes and the industrialists, which is a word you should know. The last reason is weak opposition. Now, I've seen some examples of year 10 answers to this question this week, and they're all talking about how the Weimar Republic is weak, which is good, but you don't explain why. Make sure if you're practicing this for revision or redrafting that you do. So the Weimar Republic is weak because the democracy uses proportional representation. That means that lots of smaller political parties are having to work together all the time, and that doesn't usually work. The Communist Party and the SPD hated each other, and so they were never really agreeing on anything, which is one of the reasons why the Nazis came into power, because they could never join up to fight the Nazis, really. And so getting things done in Weimar Germany was a little bit tricky. And also, let's not forget all of the problems the Weimar Republic had in the early 20s. So think about all the uprisings that you've learnt about. They don't come across as a very strong government. So give some examples of that as you go along. A couple of do's and don'ts. Make sure that you use the dates in the question. If they've given you 2 dates as an example, you need to be using those in your answer. Do not tell me something from 1923, and do not tell me something from 1933, because they are not your question dates. Think back to your timeline and add as many factors as you can to your answer. But a word of caution here, it's a 6-mark question, not a 10-mark question. So we're looking for maybe 2 or 3 strongly formed arguments rather than a giant essay. And don't forget to use point, evidence, explain, judgment, link. For a 6-mark question, I would be expecting to see 2 of these paragraphs. Don't forget that spelling, grammar and punctuation is important. I'm seeing a lot at the minute as I'm going through year 11 revision and year 10 practice questions. People aren't putting capital letters for pronouns. It's a capital G for Germany, it's a capital H for Hitler, it's a capital S and A for SA, and so on and so forth. If it's a name, it needs to have a capital. Don't misread the question. The question isn't about why Hitler gained power, it's about how he became popular. And so all of the political intrigue that happens with von Papen in 1932 isn't relevant to the question, because it's how Hitler gained power, but it's not how he gained popularity. So make sure that you're applying your knowledge appropriately to the question. So because it's a 6-mark question, you need to make sure that you're using your time appropriately. If you're going through revision and you're practicing, I would say that you don't really want to be spending more than 12 minutes on this question. So I suggest that you start a timer on your phone now, use the information that I've given you and rewrite this question in time conditions. If you'd like me to read it or your teacher to read it, then we're more than happy to. And don't forget there's interventions as well that you can bring these along to if you want someone to sit down and go through them with you. All right, good luck. Thank you.